Hi everyone, it's Matt from The Pen Habit, and I know it's been a long time since I've done one of these videos. It's been a crazy few months. You'll notice the scenery behind me has changed a little bit. I am actually recording from my new home. It's my first home. I actually purchased it a couple months ago and have been moving and getting settled in and all of that fun stuff. So we've got a lot of pens backed up that I need to review, and I want to start spending some time talking about ink and some other things like that as well, because ink, frankly, is my favorite part of working with the pens. But before we do that, I still want to get back to the pens, so let's go ahead and do that. And in today's review, I'm going to talk about this pen. And this is the Waterman's Ideal Number 7. It's a vintage pen. It's from the late 20s, I believe. And this is a red nib, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means here. I'm going to go over to the other camera and show you what the pen looks like a little bit more up close. So you can see this is an ebonite pen. It's called Red Ripple, and this is an old pen. So let's talk a little bit about what this pen is all about. So you'll notice, again, Red Ripple ebonite, or hard rubber, you'll also hear it called. These pens have a little band that runs along the top of the cap right here. And you can see that band, it's a little faded. This pen doesn't have the best color, but that band is red. And these pens came with a whole series of different colored bands that would help you determine what the nib was about. So this pen has a red nib. It looks kind of brown, but it's actually just a faded red. And that is to talk about the red nib. Now that obviously the nib itself is not red, but the red nib is a flex or a medium flex nib, kind of a semi-flex. It's 14 karat gold. And I never used a vintage flex pen before. I'd always wanted to play around with flex pens a little bit. And I have a Pilot Falcon, or an Amiki Falcon, and I had a Noodler's Conrad with a flex nib in it, and they just didn't do it for me. It wasn't until I got my hand on a vintage flex nib that I finally started to understand, oh, this is what flex is all about. So I'm very excited to show it to you today. Screw top cap, very standard here. It has a filling mechanism. This is the first pen like this, but this used to be fairly standard, a lever mechanism where you pull this little lever up. Sometimes it's a little hard to get to, especially after I have cut my fingernails. You pull this lever up, and there's a little bar on the inside of the pen. When you pull the lever up, it compresses the bar, which compresses a little rubber sac. And then you put the tip of the pen in the ink, pull the lever back, the bar comes up, the sac expands, fills up with ink, and that's how you fill the pen. And this pen will actually hold a substantial amount of ink. I haven't measured it, but it is pretty nice. Stats on this pen, I don't have a ruler, I don't have a scale. It's lighter than most of my other pens, and it's shorter than most of my other pens. I still don't feel the need to post it when I write. I suppose I could, but it still feels back heavy to me. And if you've watched most of my videos, you know I generally don't like posting my pens anyway. It fits comfortably in the hand, but man, what makes this pen, the reason I love this pen as much as I do, it's all about the flex nib. This nib is spectacular. And I'll ink this up and show it to you in a little bit. The cap has this weird little mini clip here that I'm not really a huge fan of. But all in all, for a pen that is 90 years old, nearly 90 years old, it's in fantastic shape. Has a little number 7 stamped on the bottom. And this doesn't have anything else than any other imprints on the barrel or anything. And then the clip says clip cap, WFN, it looks like, a little world symbol. And on this pen, there's a little bit of the plating is missing here, and there's a little bit of chasing around the lever. So this pen is not in pristine condition, but it's nearly 100 years old, so I don't really care about that so much. So let's go ahead and ink this up, do a bit of writing sample, and show you what this vintage flex is all about. Okay, so the ink I am using today is Rohrer and Klingner, and I apologize if I massacre that, Alt-Goldgrun, which stands for Old Gold Green. It's a very interesting ink. I like it. I like it a lot, but then sometimes I'm like, why do I like this again? Anyway, so as I was talking about, you take the lever, you pull the lever down, which compresses the sack. You stick the nib and the barrel in the ink. You pull the lever back up. You'll let it stay there for a few seconds. Pull it out, and then wipe off the nib. Pretty simple. And from what I understand, and I'm not any great expert on these vintage pens, but from what I understand, this mechanism for self-filling was one of the first mechanisms that was really out there for self-filling your pen, or for pens that where you didn't need an eyedropper or to dip it. It's been around a long time. It's not used often anymore. I know Conway Stewart uses them in some of their pens still, but most pens these days use internal mechanisms like a piston filler or a vac filler or a cartridge converter pen. So anyway, let's do a little bit of writing. So this is the Waterman number 7. They're called the Ideal, Waterman's Ideal number 7. 14 karat nib. And this is the red nib. Now, in terms of flex, this is what I would consider to be a medium flex nib. There are other grades, the brown nib, the black nib, and the pink nib. And some think that the black and the pink nib were actually the same nib, but they just called it the black nib because pink sounded feminine. And back in the 20s, men wanted masculine pens. So I suppose that's really not changed all that much even these days. But the red nib is flexible. It's not the most flexible, but it's still pretty darn flexible. And the ink, as I mentioned, Rohr und Klingner Alt-Goldgrun. Old Gold Green. So let's talk a little bit about, let's just do a little bit of writing here. So here's a little bit of a potty humor joke that I found online the other day, and it made me laugh. So here we go. There you go. Awful joke. That's a groaner for you right there. All right. So here is the pen. You can see it writes very nicely. Now let me show you what this vintage flex is all about here. And I've not worked with flex a lot, so you'll have to forgive me if maybe I'm a little, it's not quite nice enough, gives you the full sense, but I'm going to try to zoom in here just a little bit. And you can see what's happening with the tines. These tines bend a lot, and I'm not putting much pressure down in order to do that. So let me just do a little bit of a mini flex writing here. So you can see the flex on that is just, it's pretty spectacular. And you have to make sure you've got an ink that's capable of it. Now this ink does really well, and you can see it here. You can see the pooling and the shading. This ink is a beautiful shader, this Alt-Goldgrun. And if you, depending on how you use it, the shading on a flex pen is probably some of the best you're going to find anywhere. The pen's very smooth, even when it's pretty easy to write in if you're not flexing it, but and the lines are quite fine. And then you start flexing. You can see I overflex just a little bit, but you can see the variation there. It's pretty spectacular in this pen. Oh, wait, Ah, I do see a bit of an impression. It's pull it up. I didn't see it before. It's down here. I can't read it right off with the lights in my eyes, but there is a little extra impression down there. It's pretty faint. Now, these are pretty rare pens. I've not found a lot of these online. I've been looking for one with a pink nib for, well, I got this, I think, in June or July of 2013. I've been looking for a pink nib or a brown nib or a black nib because I want a wet noodle pen. And I wouldn't classify this as a wet noodle yet. I've not seen an ideal number 7 with a pink nib. I've seen one in all that time, and I missed the auction. So, but they're fairly rare. They're hard to find. So if anyone has one they want to give to me, hey, I will take it and use it and hold it dear to my heart and love it and call it George. So, in any case, this is the Waterman's Ideal number 7. It's a fantastic pen. If you're into vintage flex, I cannot recommend this pen enough, or there's several other Watermans from that era. The Waterman number 3, the Waterman number 32, I think. I know there's a 52. Want to look for that keyhole nib. If you see the keyhole nibs, and it has red, brown, black, pink on there, fantastic. That's going to be a nib that's got some flex to it. Okay, a few things I want to talk about with when you're buying vintage pens. Now, I'll preface this by saying I don't buy pens to collect them. I buy them to use them. A pen that sits in my collection unused, I don't really care that much about. In fact, I've got a couple I'll probably be selling in the not too distant future. They're beautiful pens. I like them well enough, but I don't connect with them the way you do. Anyone who uses a pen will know what I mean. Who cares deeply about pens will know what I mean when I say I don't connect with the pen. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't fit me. And so that's kind of how I approach my vintage pen buying, of which I have done, admittedly, very little. Collectors who care about the pen itself and just wanting to have the pen and have the perfect pen, obviously, you want to make sure there aren't any structural problems with the pen. No cracks in the body, around the section. Rarely, I've never seen a crack in a feed, but then again, I've not been doing this a lot, or cracks in the nibs, especially nibs that flex. For nibs that flex, you want to make sure that the nib has not been damaged, because that will impact the flex. There's something called a sprung nib, where you can actually stress the metal. The nibs sit like this and they'll flex apart as you put pressure on them. Well, you can actually get to a point where you flex them so much they won't come back to their home base. And you can, once a nib is sprung, you can do some to it to get it back to writable, I suppose, but it's never going to be that really flexible, springy, wonderful flex nib that you had before. So just pay attention to the nibs. If you're into collecting, look at the color of the barrel, the section. Mine's a little faded. It's hard to see here. I'll pop back over and see if you can tell. There's a difference between the red and black there and the red and black here. It's a little bit paler on the barrel than it is on the cap, and you can see it a little bit more clearly. Let me see if I can take it off here. You may be able to see right there. There's a difference in color from where the cap. So this looks like it was faded by sunlight. Yeah, it's pretty clear right there. You can see a differentiation right between those two sections. So look at the fittings. If they're missing their plating, they might have almost a verdigris type. Make sure they're clean. People like the imprints to be very clear to read. Like I said, I found the imprint finally on this pen. It looks like it says Waterman Inc. or WMC. It looks like a patent office number, and made in USA. It's a little hard to read. It's not very deep. People like them. People tend to value pens a little bit less if they've been stamped with someone's name. Again, I don't really care about that. I love that it gives a pen history. Writing with a pen like this is, to me, very different than writing with something like my Conway Stewart, which I love. I love my Conway Stewart. It is still my favorite pen, my Wellington favorite pen. Love it to death. But writing with something like this is a little different because it's got a sense of history. It's got an old, and not to get too overly poetic, but it's got a a world-wise and world-weary feel to it. So when I'm writing a letter with this pen, I feel a little bit more connected with the process, because this was probably used back when typewriters didn't exist, or typewriters, were there, but computers didn't exist. That's what I meant to say. So there's a lot about these pens I really, really like. This one is a great pen. I love it. I use it for writing letters. I don't carry it with me to work in my pen case because I don't want it to get cracked. I don't want it to get scratched up, and I sure as heck don't want it to get stolen. But this is one of my favorite pens. Found it on eBay, got it at a great price. Waterman Ideal number 7 with the red nib. If you're looking for vintage flex, this is something you might want to check out. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of The Pen Habit. I mentioned this in a previous video, but I'm always looking for pen pals. So if you decide you want to write a letter back and forth, you can send it to me. Send it care of Open Book Audio, and I'll put the address somewhere probably right here. Care of Open Book Audio, P.O. Box 58912, Renton, Washington, 98058. And again, address will be right there. Open Book Audio is the company that I run, doing audiobook narrations and distribution of audiobooks for other folks. So it's my company. I own it. So if you send it there, I will get the email and or the letter, and I'll send it right back. I think that'll do it for this episode, and we will see you here next time on The Pen Habit. Thanks for watching.